line left.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thank you for your patience while we're figuring out our tech difficulties. We normally don't have the challenge of not being able to hear our guest, but it is an opportunity for us to demonstrate creativity, which is exactly what we're going to be focused on today with my esteemed guest, Dr. Natalie Nixon. Welcome, Natalie.
Hi, Shannon.
Thanks for having me.
Good to see you.
It's great to see you too. And Natalie is a creativity expert. In fact, she calls herself a creativity strategist. So I'd love to hear how that name came to be.
So I'm a creativity strategist because I work at the intersection of creativity and strategy, and because I advise leaders and executive teams on how to apply creativity and strategic foresight in order to get to more transformative business results. A lot of the impetus behind my work is to demystify creativity and to help people understand that there is a direct business ROI by applying creativity.
And how would you figure out what that is? Like, are there business leaders that find that an abstract thought? And like, how do you help to make the case for that?
Well, typically I get invited in to consult for one of two big questions. One question might be, we're part of a legacy sector or a legacy industry, and new upstarts are eating our lunch, and can you help us? And that typically is a challenge of really needing business model innovation, of having lost sight of the business that they should be in because they've fallen more in love with their gizmos, their apps, what they've always done versus what the people who are buying their stuff need, whether that stuff is a product or service or an experience. And so the three things that creativity requires you to do is to engage in more inventive thinking, which means that you begin to uncover novel business models, which lead to new revenue streams. Creativity also works much better in a collaborative environment. And so when we collaborate, we tend to reduce redundancies. We are more productive. Efficiencies increase. And when efficiencies increase, costs decrease. So that's a very tangible business outcome. And thirdly, when we apply creativity, we must be customer obsessed. And in being customer obsessed, you actually make sure that you deliver more human-centered products and services, and you deliver greater value. So one question I get hired to help with is, what's the business we actually should be in? The second question that I get invited to help with is to build more collaborative org culture. A lot of companies are struggling with having a lot of silos, and that just does no one any good.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Totally. So that's some of how you're working with leaders to help them see the way in which creativity can help the bottom line and ROI. And you have many models, Natalie, some of which you've talked about in the past, like this one. I'd love for you to share the eyes with everybody. But then you've also got this new book called The Creativity Leap, which I can't wait to talk more about. So could you just tell us a little bit about the 3 I's?
Yeah, so the 3I creativity model, which thank you put up on the screen, was really something I developed as a way to help people exercise creativity. Because creativity is a competency. It's not something that only artists are good at, but artists are excellent at manifesting creativity because they're really good at sitting with the ambiguity, sitting with discomfort. But the best ways, in my experience, in my view, to exercise creativity, whether you're an attorney, a farmer, a marketing expert, is to go back and forth between inquiry, improvisation, and intuition. So those are the 3 I's. And inquiry, also known as curiosity, it's about being able to lead with questions, asking very different types of questions. Because if we keep asking the same questions, we're gonna keep getting the same
answers.
Right.
The second I, improvisation, is not about being a great stand-up comedian, ready for Saturday Night Live. being good at improvisation means you're really adaptive. You are good at building on others' ideas. You embrace experimentation, and you value the learning from mistakes. And then the third eye, intuition, is something a little trickier for people in business to really lean into. But I interviewed over 50 people for this book, The Creativity Leap, and the most innovative leaders all acknowledge their intuition. And intuition is a type of pattern recognition. It's like a muscle or a sonar. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
Yeah.
And my gut is here that people don't always trust their intuition. They often want some empirical data. So as part of what you're encouraging people to do is to allow their intuition to be data.
Yeah, exactly. We have to expand our definition of data. I was just on a webinar call earlier where we were talking about the healthcare industry. And I shared a story which I wrote about in the book during a time when my father was very, very ill. He was dying of cancer. And there was a moment when I observed a physician in the hallway who was a specialist. I think he might have been a radiologist, but I'm not certain. But I overheard him asking a question to one of the nurses, and he referenced Mr. Weathers, who was my father. And I kind of had an idea about maybe part of the answer to his question. The nurse didn't have the answer, that particular nurse. And so I approached him, I introduced myself, and I started to reference a story, an observation that one of the nurses had shared with my family. And he interrupted me. He told me that really wasn't relevant, and he would wait till the charts came in. And so I was really, it was just such an abrupt interruption and felt rude to me. And I said to him, well, data comes in all sorts of forms. And I think what the nurse shared with us is also a type of data. So my friend and colleague Valerie Jacobs likes to say that stories are data too. So I think one of the things that we have to expand is beginning to use intuition for decision making. And that certainly is what I saw and heard over and over that people were doing.
That's awesome, Natalie. And I've had several occasions where my friends and I are sitting around and talking about, what would you tell your 15-year-old self and that type of thing. And I would say that's a common theme in the responses that I also agree with, is that I would trust my intuition more. In hindsight, I was wiser than I gave myself credit. And I think that's true for many of us. So I think that encouragement to treat that as data, and that stories are data. I mean, and stories are how we remember anything too. So I mean, we could talk about percentage increases in facts and figures, but the things that people are going to remember are the stories, which I think is a yes and.
Yes, I agree. And it's not like Quant is better than Qual or Qual is better than Quant. We need both. It's like the quantitative data, the survey data, the statistical data, it kind of builds the structure and the skeleton. But to put meat on the bones, to get the texture, the nuances of why people are behaving in the way they are, making the choices they're making, we need the qualitative insights as well. I have a background in cultural anthropology and fashion, and I always say that anthropology is really good at the worm's eye view of society. And that's what it equipped me with an ability to frame questions from that perspective. A lot of other social sciences like economics, social, poli-sci, they give us the bird's eye view of society. And that bird's eye view is great for zooming out and seeing kind of the quantitative level, which is important. It shows us kind of patterns in the data. It doesn't tell us why, however, group of people, why there was an inflection between 0.2 and 0.289, right? It's only when we dive down deeper can we understand the nuances of the choices of the why that people made certain decisions.
Yeah, and I love that. And you write that in your book too. And when I read that, I thought to myself, you need both, right? Because you can't have a bird without something to eat, and you can't just have a source of nutrition with nothing to, consume it. So I think it's a reminder that, even though we may have a preference for being more in the details or more in the higher level, to find other people in your workplace who have a propensity for the opposite, so that you can look at the same thing from those two, the worm and the bird perspectives.
Yeah. And to hire for that, to cultivate that in the workplace, to sustain it is everything. And not only hiring for a certain type. Sometimes we don't know what we know. The problems that our society is dealing with are changing and are shifting. And so we need cognitive diversity in the workplace in order to come at the complexity of challenges in very different ways. And COVID-19 is demonstrating that. All the social justice protests and unrest around systemic racism are showing that we have to come equipped with a range of skill sets. So if we can ourselves be polymaths, then we need to make sure that we have teams that can kind of fill in the gaps.
Yes, absolutely. So you bring up two huge situations that both of us, and well, all of us are experiencing right now. How have you leveraged what you know about making a creativity leap to understand the pandemic in a way that's probably different than the way many are understanding it? How are you using that to help explain what's going on with the racial unrest in the country? What are the practical applications of what you know and this wisdom in current times?
Well, in my view, we are both COVID-19 and the social justice protests around systemic racism and sparked by more evidence of police brutality against African Americans. These are both systemic challenges. These are what are called in systems design and innovation work wicked problems, because they don't have a clear beginning and a clear end. They are enmeshed and networked and connected to a lot of other variables and factors. So in a system, in a complex system, it's like playing whack-a-mole. As soon as you start to deal with one part of the system, it shifts something else that inflects differently now. So kind of a very popular way that people may understand complexity and chaos theory is the butterfly effect, right? That the wings of a butterfly flapping in the Amazon jungle can have a cascading effect in a global system, so that it can cause a tsunami off the coast of Sri Lanka. So these two epic events are complex, and so they have to be solved with complexity. I call that the chewing gum method. Like if you're walking and you step into a wad of chewing gum, or if you actually put your hand to a wad of chewing gum, the best way to remove chewing gum is with chewing gum. So the best way to navigate complexity, excuse me, is with complexity. And as it turns out, creativity is a complex system. And the way we define complexity is that complexity is emergent, it's adaptive, and it's self-organizing. Those are kind of the three most popular ways of explaining complexity. And so as it turns out, all of us are equipped with amplifying creative problem solving in our work, in our lives. And that's why I believe that creativity is designed for days of uncertainty, for days of chaos, for days of ambiguity.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
That is so profound. Because I think that what people are trying to do is to meet that chaos with simplicity or something that's like logical. But what you're saying is when it's wild and what was the word? Wicked?
A wicked problem.
Yeah. I mean, the way through it is with something wild and
Correct.
something really unprecedented.
Right. To try to impose a straight line linear process to solve something that is not linear is going to create a lot of frustration and wasting a lot of time.
Yes. Hold on a minute.
So in the spirit of creativity, we're pulling this live broadcast together with cell phones and other other devices. So apologize for any of the delays. But Natalie, I wanted you to talk a bit about the pause. I think that is so rich, and I have the visual that we can share with everybody when you're ready. But could you just tell us about how we can understand the pause?
Yes. So it occurred to me by the end of March that as we all were trying to adapt to this very different normal, that some of the refrain that I was hearing from clients and from friends and family was that, gosh, this feels like Groundhog Day. Every morning it kind of feels the same, right? And also we felt like our lives were interrupted. So in the beginning, I think a lot of us experienced a bit of a slowdown, some in a really horrible economic impact ways in terms of being laid off or furloughed.
Right.
Other sectors have like increased in business and are just coming along just fine and, are having more work than ever. But still, there is value in pausing and pause. The word pause I use really deliberately because it references back to part of the way that I define creativity. So I define creativity as our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And one of the ways I describe wonder is that wonder is about awe, audacity, asking big blue sky, what if questions. And it's also about pausing. Rigor is about discipline and time on task and incessant practice. And it's often solitary. It's not necessarily that sexy or fun, but it's really essential part of creativity. So the value of the pause is really an opportunity to incorporate more wonder into our lives and our work. And I was talking to a colleague about this, and he's like, gosh, that's great. But he said businesses really don't like pausing. Businesses
right.
really
even for like a second.
Right. And that's really unfortunate because it's in the moments when we pause to zoom out, to reflect a bit more, that the insights come in. So what that one pager that you shared, I've now evolved it because the visuals, those 9 circles that you see are really, I actually referred to a little bit earlier in our conversation. I was talking about the business ROI of creativity, right? So I'm just trying to illustrate here that when we pause and when we incorporate more creativity, we get to more inventive thinking. We have more opportunities to collaborate. That certainly has been happening to us in COVID. We've had to be more inventive about the way we work, about how we figure out childcare, about how we figure out transportation, checking in on loved ones. We've had to be more collaborative.
Haircuts. Hair color,
haircut. My husband finally got a haircut today. He looks amazing. I was like, wow, I forgot. I didn't recognize you.
He's so handsome.
Exactly. But we also get to collaborate in very different ways. To launch this book in the middle of a global health pandemic, I felt really dubious about it in March. And that's saying it politely. I was actually quite scared out of my mind. I was like, how the heck am I going to do this? As it turns out, it exceeded my expectations. It's turned out to be a much better, more interesting book launch. I mean, my original idea for the book launch was I had reserved the rooftop of the Free Library of Philadelphia, which if you're from Philly, you know that it's a beautiful, stark building. It's right on the Parkway. And I grew up in Philly. I'm a library kid, grew up in libraries, love books, love reading. So anyway, couldn't do that. So what I did instead is I practiced what I preach, and I ended up doing a series of Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live conversations, starting with John Maeda, who is someone who I really admire. He's
Yes.
a guru at the intersection of tech and design. He's the chief experience officer at Publicis Sapient. Then on the actual day of the book launch, I had morning coffee with Galit Ariel, who's an augmented reality expert, a lunchtime interview with Faye Wu, who is a digital marketing expert, and then cocktails that night with King Britt, who's a super awesome, famous DJ who I grew up clubbing with in Philly back in the late 80s and early 90s. And he now is a professor of electronic music and Afrofuturist out in San Diego. He's produced stuff with Jill Scott and The Roots. And we had a cool conversation about creativity and its role in work. And then it all ended 2 days later with a Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live with Seth Godin. Needless to say, that was much more interesting and had much more reach, right? So the collaboration during this pause has been exceptional. And then finally, becoming customer obsessed. So many businesses, even the ones that are doing really well, right? They are having to reorient around, even if they're in the tech space or the healthcare space where their products are in demand, their customers are no longer in the same place, and their customers aren't going to be in the same place. So they're having to become customer obsessed in a very different way and lean in to understand what their customers need. So for all those reasons, that's why I drew up this document around the value of the pause.
I love that. And, you know, to me, that's just the power of creativity. It's something that's possible that you didn't even think of emerges because you met the crazy with the crazy. You met the you know, wicked with the wicked, and you said, I'm doing this anyway. I have goosebumps thinking about it because I remember watching your launch video and just being like, oh, I hope this is so successful. I want, you know, and then I thought, well, maybe because people are available to have more silence. And I've been hearing that repeatedly through the pandemic is people have had more time to think, more time to figure themselves out. My dear friend, Tony Murphy, calls it sitting in your own stuff.
Yes.
You know, like we all have our stuff and just like sitting there and being like, okay, I got to figure out my mess is actually what she calls it. So I want to go back to your thought on just how you could leverage this as an opportunity for innovation and growth. I particularly want to find out your thoughts on leading virtual teams. But before we leave the topic of this book launch, which is so exciting, the Creativity Leap, and here it is, it's available on Amazon. I was just trying to look up your recent accolades. I know you're so humble that this pains you to say this, but what it's like number 2 on the Amazon list for creativity.
Well, what was so this was really thank you so much for your support and your encouragement, Shannon. So here was another amazing surprise. Like it has exceeded my expectations. For almost 2 weeks, the Creativity Leap ranked number 1 on Amazon's hot new releases in paperback. And then last Thursday through Sunday, it was probably like 4 days, the audio version ranked number 2, and the Kindle version ranked number 3. So I was able to take a screenshot of it being ranked as number 1, 2, and 3 for 4 days. That was pretty amazing.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I love it. I love it. And for anyone who hasn't seen this yet, this book is amazing. I have tabs all over it. I'll read it multiple times.
For writing that, you know, it's dog-eared, it's underlined. That means a lot to me.
Yes.
Yeah, and the questions in the back, I know I'll be going back to those multiple times. I even love how you use a glossary because sometimes we don't have the same definition of terms. It's so like relatable. And you talk about one of my things tabbed off is the intuition and wicked problems.
Yep.
That really interesting. And then the remix, reframe, repurpose. I love that bit. So before we get too much into this, I do want to have you respond to the leveraging creative thinking in uncertain times like right now. and leading teams, because many people that I work with are really struggling with this. Like, how do I engage my teams? What are ways in which I can be an effective leader? I think everybody's leaning into technology, as flawed as it can be sometimes. So just what are some of the, what advice do you have for leaders who are really looking to be effective in this unusual way?
That's a great question, a very relevant and pertinent question. And I actually want to start my answer by building on what we were just talking about prior, talking about the pause. One of the things that we need to kind of correct is these, what I'm starting to call Zoom-palooza, right? It's like Zoom constantly. And one of the effective ways to lead a team now is to acknowledge their humanness. I don't want to say humanity. I mean, their humanness, right? To acknowledge that they have family, that they need to rest, that they need breaks. And I was reading a really wonderful book this spring, which I want to do like a video post on. It's called Essentialism by Greg McKeown, right?
Yeah. I have it right here.
Awesome book.
Right here.
Love that book. And
me too. I love the subtitle, which is The Disciplined Pursuit of Less.
Right. And it's very nicely linked into my idea of wonder and rigor and pausing. But he gives a great example of a company that began to they drew boundaries and lines around when they would have meetings. And some people were naysayers and terrified. Oh, but what if the client needs to meet, within the time we say we're not meeting or outside of our boundaries or within our boundaries. And they stuck to it. And what do you know? The clients conformed. And what if companies, maybe you could inch your way into it and you say, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, we're cordoning off 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. only, or for Zoom, right? And mornings, you can do whatever deep work you need to do, or go for a walk, or help the kids with stuff. And then you clock off at 2. And it's not like you're clocking off, but you're not, this is very performative. There's a lot, even when we're at work, it's like Nat's greatest hits, the best stuff, right? It's like we all show up to work in drag, and we all have to be performing. And I was talking on a podcast earlier today about how that affects your neural synapses. There's so much going, even though you think you're at a meeting and you're focused on something, you're not really. There's a lot other things that that your brain has to be aware of. Anyway, I think one of the ways we can really, as leaders can be supportive of teams, is to actually try to do more with less, is to be very conscientious of breaks and pausing. And that way really acknowledge the humanness. The other is to really use this as an opportunity to explore new strategic partnerships. Just as I discovered in my book launch, gosh, I can now try to have collaborative conversations with a range of people who I wouldn't have thought to ask earlier.
Right.
Just try it. What could you now learn from someone in Belgium, or someone in Tokyo, or someone in Johannesburg? Like there are so many different opportunities now because of digital that we can explore. And those types of very different strategic partnerships are going to spark lateral thinking and new ways of approaching old problems and gamify it. Like I have a coaching client. And I was really encouraged, and he's an attorney, and I'm married to an attorney, so I understand the mindset of attorneys. But he was getting excited because I was really encouraging with something we're working through, that he gamify what he's asking his teams to do. When we play, things stick.
So make it fun.
Gamify
it, make it fun. And I just love that. And it's in one of your questions. I'm trying to find it here. Oh, here it is. Because one of your questions is about, like, who are you networking with? who's not in your like regular everyday life. Like you just brought up geographic differences or even political differences or
Yes.
whatever. All of the ways in which we're diverse. Because that's a key message in this book is like in order for us to truly be creative, we need the stimuli from all of these maybe I don't want to say like unprecedented, but like the sources that you may not naturally go to all the time. Really challenge your thinking about who stimulates my thinking. Like your book launch, like who would have thought that I could have all of these conversations and how rich they would be. So I just love that idea of challenging yourself to think about your network and think about who influences you. Join ERGs for groups of people who are unlike you, employee resource groups. Stretch.
And think about all the sorts of webinars that you could just log on to for free. I mean, I don't know about you, but every day I'm getting notices about this webinar, so much from a company I've never heard of. I'm like, oh, if I can fit it up, let me try it. I'll learn something different and new. In the book, one of the things I encourage people to do is incentivize a member from your team. Well, this is, once we get into our next normal, when we can be around each other again, however conferences will look like next. But incentivize people to go and attend a conference, fund it, incentivize it, give them the time and the money and the resources to do it, to attend a conference in a sector totally unrelated to your industry. And I got this idea from many, many years ago. I'm a fan of the work of Daniel Pink, and one of his and I think it was his book it was one of the earlier books that was really exposing people to design thinking. But he also was giving tips and he was encouraging people to pick up a magazine about a subject you would never want to read. Like for me, it might be like auto mechanics magazine.
Exactly what I was thinking.
Or a golf magazine. I'm not into golf. So, but leafing through it, you'd be surprised a new idea that might occur to you, that something it sparks. So similarly, this is the idea that I had of go to a different conference. I try to go to a very different type of conference that I've never been to at least once a year. Since I've had my own business, it's very important to me to always be in a mode of learning. And what better way to learn is to go into a situation where I have no idea what these folks are talking about, and I would have never approached it in XYZ way.
Right. And I'm sure you get invited to speak at conferences for groups of people that you didn't know had an association or a group, right? Like I remember one time I got invited to speak for a plastic surgeons for the surgeons themselves convention. And I literally looked out in the audience and I was like, this is the most beautiful group of people I've ever seen in my life. But so give me an example of a conference that you've attended just to stretch yourself as encouragement to those who are listening.
Well, this is probably not a fair example because this was a fun one. But the Wall Street Journal, like so many newsprint publications, they need to reinvent their business model. So many news publications have gone into the events business, right? They convene. They are drawing people to their print media through bringing people together. So they had a Future of Everything festival in New York City. And I thought, and it was 3 days, and it was cool the way they designed it, because it was part of it was in this really cool converted warehouse in Tribeca, but it was also, they had events in different parts of the city. And I attended and mind blown by meeting people who were had created food out of bacteria, athletes who were talking about finance and micro investing. And so, I mean, it was a really eye-opening experience that helped me think differently about my own work.
Oh, Natalie, that is so cool.
Yeah.
And motivating, right? And
yes.
Here I'm picturing you at this conference in awe and wonder, which I want to talk more about. And then it made me think about how brave you are. And so I really think that there's a relationship here between creativity and bravery.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So there's a great, oh gosh, I just forgot the name of the movie, but I referenced the movie. It's in Heart's Gone. Oh gosh, I'll remember it after we finish talking. But I referenced it in the book because there's a dialogue going on between two characters where a teenage girl is really nervous about she doesn't really want to go to college, and she's smart. She got into a great school, and she's afraid to tell her father that she really wants to pursue music. And she's talking to her girlfriend, and her girlfriend says very wisely, as only teenagers can do sometimes, well, you know what, you got to be brave before you can be good. So this idea of bravery before mastery is something that I really love. That, I mean, when I think back on my life, 90% of the things that have catapulted me to another level, that have exposed me to a group of people I would have never previously worked with or gotten to know, have been because of my naivete, where I was just, I didn't know squat, and I just thought, oh, let me try this.
Yeah. Yeah. It was your instinct. Back to your instinct, right? Like, I don't know, this might be fun.
Exactly. And so what I now do as I'm getting older is I really try to catalog and document all those moments, because as you know, the older we get, the more we know, and we know all the things that could go wrong. But I really tried to hold on to, but if I hadn't tried to start Nat's Hats, this hat design business I started when I was 22, 23, living in New York City. I remember I went into the garment industry. I had $50. I bought the most beautiful old, like 1920 sewing machine that was, I lugged it up and down the subway steps to get it home.
Oh my.
The two Italian American garmentos gave it to me maybe for like $45. I still have it. It's now like a work of art. But that's how I started my hat design business. And if I had known how hard that process was going to be, I would have never attempted it. But it was also so much fun, and it exposed me to so many different things. If I decided to do a PhD while working full time because I thought it was just going to be a big paper at the end, like stupid, naive. But it exposed me to such a very different way of thinking that influences my work now. So bravery before mastery is really, really important.
Yes. Yeah. And I think Brene Brown refers it to being in the arena.
Yes.
And she says, I only want feedback from people who have been in the arena, right? Like other people who have also been brave. And I do find that that's true. Like our greatest critics are those who have stayed pretty safe and secure, but judge the work of those in the arena. So I think it's really wonderful to hear you say that. And I think it's encouragement to those who are listening to, like, if your instinct is, man, that's interesting, take a webinar. I love Coursera for that reason.
Yes.
I love it for a lot of reasons, but I love that there's no financial obligation. The range of topics is endless, and you always learn something, right? You learn about the professor at the very least. You learn about the topic, about the other students. So it's such a great way to keep us young and keep our minds flowing. So I do want to have you share a little bit about this wonder and rigor, which is like the essence of what you're talking about, the toggle between wonder and rigor. And then any questions that people have, please put them in the chat. I've got also that Poll Everywhere chat available.
So I referenced already that I define creativity as our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And I also have referenced already my chewing gum method idea, that to solve complex problems, we should use complexity. So as it turns out, creativity is a complex system. And to geek out a bit, when I was working on that PhD, one of the things I was exposed to, I had to learn a little bit. I'm no expert, but I know enough to be a little dangerous at a cocktail party, is chaos theory. And so that brought me to the work of a whole group of scholarship called, who are chaotic systems thinkers. And the word chaord is a word that D. Hock made up. D. Hock was the first president of Visa, the credit card company. And he, rightly so, said, how am I going to lead a global organization based on the virtual exchange of currency, which is really, we think that's what credit card companies are.
Right.
Based on an org chart made up of boxes and arrows. And he was a big naturalist. He was taking a walk through the woods, and he thought, what, organizations are made up of people. People are
living organisms, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he thought to himself, how could I lead an organization that's based on both chaos and order? Excuse me.
Yeah.
Please.
Hang on a second.
No, it's okay. You're in demand, Natalie.
I had
a lot of talking because everybody wants to hear what you're.
I had something to eat before we spoke, and so a little caught my throat. Excuse me. But D. Hock said, how can we create human organizations that mimic what we see in nature? So throughout nature, we have chaos, which is not anarchy. Chaos is randomness. And we have order. And order is not control. Order is structure. And so he said, we need something that has a bit of chaos, a bit of order. I'm going to call it a chaord. So that, that's amazing creativity in and of itself. So you can understand how I've taken that stream through into my work. So some years later, I'm consulting, I'm helping a lot of organizations create cultures of innovation. I have this creeping sensation that they're going about it the wrong way, that we actually, and I had the sensation that they're going about it the wrong way because people seem to be talking over and around each other when they're talking about innovation. Right. And in my view, we actually had to start with creativity. But then I thought, well, how can I figure out an accessible way to explain what creativity is? Because most C-suite leaders are not trying to hear about creativity. Creativity is not a word that's mentioned in the boardroom. And in my view, it's because we don't actually understand it. We have ghettoized it in the arts, which isn't fair to artists. We think it's this woo-woo, frilly add-on. So I went back to what I knew. In part, it was all that scholarly doctoral research on complexity theory and improvisational organizations, chaotic systems, but also I grew up studying dance. And I was really interested in not only improvisation, but also intuition, because I was observing that, and this is going back to the 3 I's. The way I got to the 3 I's, well, the improv part you just heard through that PhD research. The intuition was because when I was a professor and I started the strategic design MBA program, I started working with a lot more startup leaders and entrepreneurs. And they consistently, when they would tell their origin story, they would say things like, something told me not to do the deal, or something told me to work with her over him. And I said to myself, I think that's intuition that they're talking about, but we don't touch that in MBA programs, we don't touch it in med school and law school. And I said, well, what if I could do a miniature ethnography of intuitive leadership? And I went back to saying that I think I would want to look at dancer choreographers, because I think they use intuition to problem solve. And I think intuition is pattern recognition. I want to look at chefs and DJs, and I interviewed King Britt for that as well. But the intuition piece became a really important part. So did looking at the way dancers and choreographers problem solve, because I saw that in dance, there's an incredible amount of order. There's discipline. You see it on stage, right? But we all have been to performances where the dancers are technically proficient, but it doesn't really hit you here.
Right.
And I was like, well, what is that other thing? And that's when I started exploring other ways to describe it. And I landed on wonder. And then the counterpoint to that, I said, was rigor. But you can see that it's very much mirrored to, I'm very much influenced by chaotic systems thinking. So that's the wonder rigor piece. And it's important to toggle back and forth between both. I have these two corollaries I talk about in the book, which is that rigor cannot be sustained without wonder. You'll burn out. You need the wonder. And at the same time, wonder is found in the midst of rigor. For me, rigor is like completing my taxes or doing a really big Excel sheet or weeding the garden or something, right? But it's in the middle of those moments that wonder often occurs.
Right. And you could even say, like, in some of those activities, it's a pause, or maybe it's because your brain is so fixed on something that part of your brain becomes available, I would guess, to that other consideration. And then sometimes it's just a matter, in my opinion, it's also a matter of need, right? Like, I think for many of us during this pandemic, nobody's good at this. Nobody's been doing this before. But I think those who have been able to thrive, even, dare I say, beyond survive, is those who met it with rigor and wonder, which is like, I don't know how I'm gonna sustain my business, but I do know that people probably need this, and this, and like that might also be a reason why your book came at such a perfect time, because people needed a resource or a framework to say, this is a chance for you to practice. Right? This is prime time for creative thinking.
Absolutely. And what better time to practice creativity during the time of a pandemic, during times where things are getting pretty messy, pretty sticky, combined with, social justice unrest. And so, that's absolutely how I adjusted, I adapted, I reframed and said, actually, it's a good thing that this book is coming out during a time of so much turbulence, and not during a time, not that there's ever a time like this, but during a time when things are just kind of copacetic and calm.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about inquiry, the way you describe it is like asking better questions and moving away from why and moving toward how. And I think, with all the situations that we're going through right now, we'll talk about the racial disparity and the challenges that we have been seeing in our country for decades that are really hitting a surface now, where people are much more activated, in my opinion, than we've seen in a while. I think it's a great opportunity for us to ask those exploratory, creative, open-ended types of questions to seek solutions.
Yeah, and the social justice protests, which were sparked by the brutal murder of George Floyd, they sparked a level of what I would call actionable empathy in people, and a diverse group of people. Unfortunately, this was not something that was news to African Americans, but for the rest of the world, not just the United States. It was revealed the atrocity of this, and this is something that, from the time of Emmett Till, when his mother in the 1950s refused to close the casket on her 13-year-old son, what's happened is that people are asking, as you said, why? And then they're shifting to, well, what if we had a very different society? So then how could we get to that point? And I realized one of the things I learned in the process of writing this book, of thinking through this book, is that while in the work of design thinking and design strategy, we always say, we start with empathy. And I realized, as I was really probing my own work and what I was trying to offer and deliver, we also need to take a step back and pause around empathy, because before you can empathize, you have to be curious. You have to ask, why do they sit over there and not over here? Why is he always late? Why do they do it X way and we do it Y way, right? So we have to, again, the value of the pause. We have to pause and be a little more curious about things that we just kind of assumed or took for granted, and have decided that we no longer can do that. And that then sparks the empathy, which hopefully will really lead to systemic change.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And I think that the the way that we will see change is that curious thinking and that level of empathy that this situation did create for many who haven't been woke as people are now. And I think for us to keep the conversation alive and well, and to, you know, challenge ourselves with these questions, to use the pauses for our own inner work, because I think for us to be empathetic, you have to go to a part of you that understands. And I think that seek first to understand is a way to start. And then, you know, from that understanding, asking those, how did you describe it? The activism?
Activist empathy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that activist empathy, which is not just something you now understand. I kind of think that's like the booby prize. But like, so you understand and then what, right? So really being a catalyst and using that to perpetuate and to know that in the messy, I mean, what you've said to me tonight has given me so much hope that even though it seems very messy and wicked, that if we can look at this, you know, the racial injustice we'll focus on in particular, as you know, let's come up with the radical solution. Let's come up with a really out of the box kind of intervention so that we can really see the progress that we're all looking for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the last thing I want you to share with everybody is these cards, which I ordered but I haven't received yet.
Oh,
so
awesome.
Tell us about these, and then we'll just encourage everybody to get out there and take a creativity leap.
Oh, thank you for ordering the book. Thanks for ordering the Wonderrig discovery deck. So it's funny, I actually created the cards as a way to help my clients. I created the cards because I hadn't even written a book proposal, and but was just inching my way into conversations with clients to get them to explore creativity as a competency that they should be applying in their efforts to be more innovative. And so the Wonderrig discovery deck is a series of questions that teams can ask themselves. And there's 3 phases of the game. And the first phase is really to kind of set mindset, right? There you go. And by the way, big shout out to Pixel Parlor here in Philadelphia in the town neighborhood. I've worked with Pixel Parlor since I started my business in 2015, and they are so good at translating what's in my head to just a really compelling visual. So
wow.
But the phases of the game are to really help teams go through what's the problem we're trying to solve, what's the mindset shift we have to make, how could we apply more wonder, more rigor to this challenge, what's the difference that it could result in. And then I'm always very interested in being tactical, right? So that's the wonder and the rigor. Like, so what then do we need to have in place tomorrow, a week from now, a month from now, next quarter, in order to make this real and actionable? But the game is a lot of fun. People have given me feedback that they also, awesome, thank you.
Yeah, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. People have also given me feedback that, you know, it's fun just around the dinner table. It's a conversation starter. However people want to use it, I'm open to that. But that was the reasoning behind it. It was really to help my clients inch their way into figuring out how they could apply creativity in really some tangible ways.
Yeah.
Oh, Natalie, that's amazing. And it's a demonstration of your leadership. Because I think leaders are people who influence, right? And so you found ways through this book, which everybody must get, very practical. You could read it over the weekend. You can refer back to it. It's got questions and just stimulation. At the end of every chapter, there's something like actions that you could take. So everybody's got to go get that. And then these cards for us to do our own work, like you said, around the dinner table or around our teams, especially people who have told themselves that lie that they're not creative. Right? Oh, I'm left brain, or I'm this, you know, that does not exclude you from creativity, right?
No. The whole point of this book is that I want to demystify creativity. Creativity should not be siloed and be only the burden of artists to demonstrate and act upon. Artists are just excellent at wrestling with the rigor and doing that rigorous work. They're also excellent at setting aside time and space for wonder. And the most incredible attorneys, scientists, farmers, plumbers are super creative. So we are hardwired to be creative as humans. It's just a matter of getting the courage and the deciding to practice it more in our own life.
Yes. Oh, so well said. Thank you, Natalie, for sharing your wisdom with us tonight.
Thank you, Shannon. Thanks for having me. Thanks for supporting the book and the card.
Always.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, you're awesome. All right, we'll see you soon, everybody. See you next Wednesday. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.